All right, hello everyone. Welcome to my channel. I am Thomas and I do educational videos. And today we are doing the 112th video on the reciprocal system of theory. And this is a theory of everything. So, a system of theory. Basically, if you understand the system, if you become fluent in how the system works, then you can use the system yourself and plug it into any subject that you want. And so it's a theory of everything. It can be plugged into any subject. And it was derived by Dewey B. Larson back in the 20th century. And the basics of the reciprocal system is that we have a universe of motion. At first, Larson called it space-time, and he's also called it change in 3 dimensions. But the main word that he uses is motion. Other people have come up with that concept of a universe of motion. Thomas Hobbes, René Descartes, Arthur Eddington, and others. But what sets Larson apart from them is his kind of redefinition of motion, as motion is the relationship between space and time. Now, the basic motion that we know of, speed, is a relationship between space and time. 10 miles per hour, 10 miles of space in 1 hour of time. But we find that every scientific entity, quantity that we know of is also a relationship between space and time. Now, space and time are multidimensional. And so you're not just talking about one dimension of space and time, but like, for example, you have acceleration. Acceleration is space over time to the second power. You know, the speed of a free-falling object is 9.8 meters per second squared. That is 9.8 meters of space in 1 second squared. So that is acceleration, space over time squared. The reverse of that would be force, time over space squared. Is force. Energy, time over space. Matter is time to the 3rd power over space to the 3rd power. Pressure is time over space to the 4th power, and so on and so forth. And that is a great check for the system, because you can plug in all the classical mechanical equations with their MKS units, and you can substitute in the time-space units and see if the equations come out with the math or algebra. Now, motion, Larson says, is the relationship between space and time. And the reciprocal part is that space and time are reciprocals of each other in motion. Okay, you cannot have space by itself and you cannot have time by itself. They are always in a ratio or a fraction in motion. And if you invert the fraction, then you go over into the other realm. So that is why time and space are reciprocals of each other. Everything that adheres to space also adheres to time, and vice versa. The thing that we know about space is that it's 3 or more dimensions. Therefore, time is also 3 or more dimensions. Larson calls this coordinate space and coordinate time. The thing we know about time is that it's always flowing. It's always getting later and later and later, the progression of time. And therefore, space has these same qualities. Space is progressing. It's always getting farther and farther apart, which was observed by the Hubble telescope with the recession of the distant galaxies. The distant galaxies are always moving farther and farther apart. That is what Larson calls clock time and clock space. Now, space and time also are the same in that they come only in discrete units. There's no 1/4 of a unit or 0.26 units of space or time. There's either one or there's none. There's either two or there's none. It's an integer, and 1 unit of space per 1 unit of time is the speed of light. So the speed of light is just 1 in this system. He calls it unit speed quite often. And that unit speed is not the maximum speed of the universe, which it is according to Einstein. But according to Larson, the speed of light is the midpoint of the universe, there being half of the universe that's moving faster than the speed of light, and then half that's moving slower than the speed of light. The faster than the speed of light he calls the cosmic sector, or sector 2. Slower than the speed of light, he calls that the material sector, or sector 1. Sector 1 grows by aggregation, bonding, up to its most complex level, which Larson says is the DNA molecule. The most complex molecule, billions of atoms per molecule. And at that point, DNA is complex enough to accommodate a entity from sector 2 that is what he calls a control unit. It controls the material sector unit. And the combination of the two, material and cosmic, at the right proportions, in the right configuration, is what Larson calls the life unit. Life is a combination of material and cosmic sector entities. And that life unit starts from its most simple level, the single-celled organism, all the way up to its most complex level, through development and evolution, which Larson says is the intelligent human being, or humanoid. And at that point, the intelligent human being becomes eligible to be controlled overall by an entity from sector 3. And now sector 3 is what Larson refers to as the region that is beyond space and time, or independent of space and time. I would even argue that it is the origin of space and time, and that it is the speed of light region, the region of 1. And other people would have called that God, or the gods, or goddess, or spirit, or numinous, or religious. Larson calls it sector 3. And that sector communicates with human beings, the intelligent human beings, and through various channels such as intuition, insight, revelation. And those communications are always correct. And sector 3 is always good. But our ability to decode those messages is limited because we are basically single-celled spiritual organisms on our path to becoming able to decode those messages, but it takes preparation, concentration, it takes dedication to learn how to decode these messages, especially the more complex ones. Simple intuitions are basically within the grasp of anybody to interpret, but the more complex ones can require a great amount of preparation and training before we're able to decode them. Now, so we're looking at his final book here that came out in 1995 after his death. And it is called Beyond Space and Time. So as you might guess, it has to do with this metaphysical entity and communication, and what is the general nature of this metaphysical entity. And we are at the second to the last chapter, called Survival. And this is kind of about the survival of the soul after you die, and kind of what happens after you die, and so on. And he's talking about deathbed repentance, and things like that. So we're going to take over here, I think, toward the end of the chapter. So this is Larson. Actions that are taken in the hope of reward or in fear of punishment may benefit the community or some of its individual members, and for that reason may be wholly commendable. But actions dictated by motives of this kind are part of the life of a human being as a biological organism, an animal, Sector 2, not part of his life as an ethical man, Sector 3. The nature of the anticipated reward or punishment is immaterial. Actions taken to gain the approbation of fellow citizens or to better one's chances of a pleasant existence in a hypothetical hereafter are looked upon more favorably by the community at large than actions taken for material gain. And actions dictated by a desire to avoid divine retribution are likewise regarded as more commendable than actions dictated by a desire to avoid the penalties of the criminal laws. But in principle, there is no difference. All of these anticipated rewards and punishment are simply the human equivalent of the carrot and the stick, and they are part of Sector 2 existence. If Sector 3, the ethical aspect of man, is in control, actions will be taken because they are right, not because of any benefits that are anticipated. As soon as a man does an action because he thinks he will promote his own interests thereby, he is acting not from a sense of its rightness, but from self-interest. This is a place where legal and moral judgments diverge. From the legal standpoint, it is immaterial whether a person refrains from committing a crime as a matter of principle or because he is afraid of punishment. But from the moral standpoint, one is a moral decision, the other has no moral significance. Our actions are, quote, from Abelson, our decisions about the standards of right action and moral virtue should be consistent with the conditions under which we hold people responsible for their actions. The example, that's end quote. The example just cited shows that this is impossible. Indeed, our finding that there is no ultimate reward or punishment means that the concept of holding people responsible for their lack of compliance with the moral code is meaningless. There is no such thing as moral responsibility in this sense, since there is no judgment and no penalty. Individuals have legal responsibility for their actions, which may result in penalty or punishment. They also have social responsibilities, and the manner in which they discharge these may bring praise or blame from their associates, but they are not held responsible in this sense by any moral agency. Of course, the moral aspect is taken into consideration in both the legal and social situations, but it is not controlling in either case. Whether a particular act has some moral aspects complies with the moral code is a matter of objective fact. In some cases, a complicated balancing of positive and negative moral values may be required, but the final answer is always either yes or no. Even if the wrongdoer was mentally incapable of distinguishing right from wrong, his violation of the code has exactly the same moral standing as if it were deliberate. No question of responsibility is involved here. A pattern of violations of the moral code indicates a lack of progress toward the ultimate goal of human existence. And no progress is no progress, regardless of what the underlying reason may be. It is true that there is an element of inequity in a situation in which an individual who cannot improve the Sector 3 aspect of his personality has the same standing as one who deliberately chooses not to do so. But if equitable treatment is to be achieved, it must be accomplished by some collateral means. The equity issue will be given some consideration in the next chapter. Some of the conclusions reached in the development of thought in the preceding pages will undoubtedly distress many sincere and well-meaning persons. In particular, the rejection of the reward and punishment concept is a major departure from generally accepted thought, and to many it will seem to strike at the very foundations of religion. Quote, Catholics and Orthodox or fundamentalist Protestants alike find it very difficult to conceive how men can lead a moral and religious life without the threat of a final judgment lurking in the background, reports J.H. Randall. Back to Larson, there are many in these and other denominations who will question this statement when it is expressed in these somewhat pejorative terms. But it can hardly be denied that all organized religions that promise survival into a new existence portray the pleasures or discomforts of that existence as contingent upon the nature of the individual's behavior during his earthly life. On the other hand, our findings are that actions taken in the hope of reward or in fear of punishment have no moral significance one way or the other. This means that those who listen to the assertions of present-day organized religions are being promised rewards that they will not receive and remission of punishment that would not be inflicted in any event. But after all, must we be bribed to do what is right? Isn't there something more satisfying about the conclusion that ethical man is honest because he wants to be honest, not because he expects to receive a reward for this conduct in the hereafter? Isn't it more to the credit of the human race if its members are kind and considerate rather than harsh and cruel because they want to act in this manner rather than because they are trying to avoid eternal punishment? In our capacity as scientists, we merely accept the truth as we find it, without any personal feelings of approval or disapproval. But in our capacities as members of the human race, we should be more than pleased that the results of the investigation took the form that they did. Rather than confirming the doctrine of eternal reward and punishment, the heaven and hell that have come down to us from our primitive ancestors. In any event, this is a scientific development, a step-by-step construction of a logical structure on factual foundations, and since the conclusions that are reached in the process are necessary consequences of the established facts upon which the whole structure of thought is based, they are integral parts of that structure and they cannot be discarded or modified regardless of what emotional reactions they may arouse. Of course, if a conclusion conflicts with observed facts, or if it is inconsistent with scientific conclusions previously reached and verified, the logical inference to be drawn is that there has been some mistake in the reasoning upon which this conclusion was based. In this case, a restudy of the problem would be in order. But the conclusions now under consideration do not fall in this category. They are not only consistent with the observed facts, but also resolve many of the contradictions and inconsistencies in previous lines of thought. The inevitable objections, therefore, cannot be allowed to influence the presentation. This is particularly important in view of the fact that one of the major reasons for developing a clear and consistent picture of the non-physical aspects of human life is to provide logical thinkers, both scientists and non-scientists, with a view of the universe and their relation to it, which they will find acceptable. An alternative both to the cold and sterile mechanistic viewpoint on one side and to what Reinhold Niebuhr calls the anachronistic ethics and incredible myths of organized religion on the other. If we are to satisfy this need, there can be no compromise with the truth. We must follow the development of the logical structure wherever it leads, regardless of emotional preferences or prejudices. When the basic question of survival is answered in the affirmative, the next issue that arises is whether we survive as identifiable individuals. Are we still ourselves? This is a more difficult question to answer on the basis of the facts at hand. There is no doubt but that survival takes place on an individual basis, since the individual control units are the entities that survive. But where this control unit is still in a status analogous to that of a unicellular biological organism, The surviving unit can hardly be considered as having any real identification with an individual. If there has been enough development of this unit so that a definite ethical personality has been constructed, then we can envision something equivalent to survival of a specific human individual. Just how far this development would have to proceed in order to generate enough identifying characteristics to enable the surviving entity to be recognizable to itself or to others as a continuation of the human existence of which it was previously a part is far from clear. Since memory is a physical process, it cannot be expected that an individual will retain any memories of his earthly life. This might seem to close the door on survival as a specific individual, inasmuch as memory is commonly regarded as essential to continuation of the same identity. But it is not at all certain that this is actually true. Is an amnesia victim, for instance, a different person just because he cannot remember his past? Then, too, most of us have few, if any, memories of the earliest years of our life. Here we have what is unquestionably a continuation of the same individual existence without the continuity of memory. Perhaps continuation of identity after death involves something of this nature. However, we should also bear in mind that even if a person must have a certain amount of knowledge of his previous thoughts and actions in order to maintain his status as a specific individual, it does not necessarily follow that this knowledge must be derived from memory. Whatever is available from memory is also available by means of clairvoyance. The ESP abilities thus far demonstrated in the human race are not adequate to serve as a substitute for memory, but it would be reasonable to conclude that these abilities will reach a higher stage of development in any more advanced phase of existence. Thus, the memory issue is not a critical one. Okay, that does it for today. We'll talk to you tomorrow. Thanks for tuning in.